Hello, my friends and fellow book nerds. Welcome to Friday Reads on my channel, Lindy's Magpie Reads. If you're new here, I'm Lindy, and I'm going to try and get through this in a timely fashion because in about 40 minutes, there's a Zoom presentation that I've signed up for. It's called Heavy Metal. It's a shadow jury discussion of the Newbery Award in the US for children's fiction. And yeah, really looking forward to that. So Canada Reads announced the shortlist this week of the 5 titles. Which book is the one that all Canadians should read? I'm going to link information down below. But out of the 5 that were chosen, 4 were on my preferred list, so I'm really happy. And the 5th one is one that I've also read, and I also think it's excellent. So if you're interested in reading good Canadian literature, you could pick any of these. I do have a favorite, Ducks by Kate Beaton, which is a memoir in graphic novel format. And one thing I'm really excited about is that the defender for this book is Matea Roach. I had never heard of her before. I haven't watched Jeopardy since my mom died, but they are the most successful Canadian champion. In 2022, I think they won 23 games. And this is what they have to say about defending ducks. This book is a window into so many critical conversations about the environment, about Indigenous land rights, about the student debt crisis, and about gender relations. So I think she's going to do a great job defending ducks. And the other thing that happened this week is the Scotiabank Giller Prize announced who the jury is this year for 2023. And the chair is Ian Williams. I had already decided that this year I want to get to some of the Giller Prize winners that I have on my shelf, have not yet read. And February, I had already planned to read Ian Williams' Reproduction. This one won in 2019. I have read his more recent memoir, Disorientation, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to this. And speaking of catching up on Giller Prize winners, I'm going to be buddy reading the 2017 winner, Bellevue Square, by Michael Redhill. I'm going to be buddy reading this with Jolene of Bookworm Adventure Girl. And sometime this year, I hope to get to The Sentimentalists by Johanna Skibsrud. Now, if any of you are interested in doing a buddy read of this, hit me up, because that's one way to make sure that I get a book read. Okay, now on to what I have read. In my recent reads on Tuesday, I talked about No Friend for the Mountains by Behrouz Boochani, and one of my subscribers recommended The Shadows by Vincent, Zabus, and Hippolyte. Zabus is Belgian and Hippolyte is French, and the English translation of this graphic novel is by Madden. So thank you to Dia of Novel Ideas for recommending this, because it is fantastic. The art, the story. This is a story of asylum seekers. This one is fictional, and I want to share just how fabulous Hippolyte's art is as well. So the frame story is a young man, an asylum seeker, is telling the story of how he came to be in this detention center prison. So he's talking to an interviewer, and you can see all this dark, really scribbly, textured art around him, and often throughout this book, that really shows the confusion and uncertainty that surrounds the life of a refugee. There aren't specific countries named, and even the characters in this story aren't named. It's the boy, the girl. They came from the Low Country, he says. You have to understand that where I come from, the subsoil is very valuable. And this, right away, you know, this is a universal story about land grabs and resource extraction and war. There's digging everywhere. So one day the young man and his sister come home to find that their house is gone. They have no idea where their parents are. They do join a line of refugees making an exodus, but they end up lost in a forest, just the two of them, where the young man discovers that the ghost of his father has been following them. They encounter so many obstacles along the way, including a capitalist ogre. He says he used to just eat children, but he's discovered that now he can get rich on their labor and just eat the ones that are the least productive. But the brother and sister do manage to escape with a couple of other refugees, and together they make their way to the border. I love this ironic imagery. That's the chapter page for chapter 3. The arbitrariness of national borders, you know. So eventually they make it to a city where they encounter the smuggler Snake, who gets them as far as a desert, and war finds them there. They manage to get to an ocean and get on a ship, but there are further dangers, of course. Look at that watercolor art, isn't that gorgeous? And one of the things that they encounter is exile, sickness, and again, love the art. Then there are those who successfully reach the other country only to be imprisoned. Things become much more black and white. Their psychological comfort is ignored. One of the lines here is, "Don't forget, the goal is to make you not want to stay here." This is something that comes up repeatedly in Behrouz Boochani's work as well. The temptation for this young asylum seeker is to lie, because he wants to tell the kind of story that is going to allow him to stay. But the ghosts of those who had accompanied him keep encouraging him to tell the truth. I have another comment about the imagery in this, and that is the way that Hippolyte has used masks. So we don't see faces for many of these characters, but it really reminded me of Miyazaki's Spirited Away, and also the art in this Finnish graphic novel, Oksi, by Mari Ahokoivu. There's an example. It's outstanding. Thank you, Dia. Thank you so much for recommending this. I found it in my library's Hoopla collection as a digital graphic novel, which I do like reading on my iPad. And coincidentally, just this week on the podcast More to Come, that's Publishers Weekly Comics News, they mentioned that Europe Comics, who published the English language edition of The Shadows, has announced that they're shutting down their customer-facing operations. I will link to a story down below about that. It seems like they are still going to be publishing them, but you will have to access them through your library or other sources, I guess. For those of you comic nerds, by the way, if you're not already listening to More to Come, I've been listening to it for 10 years, and I hear about great stuff through it. It was recommended to me by Michael Kindness, who used to do that Books on the Nightstand podcast with Anne Kingman. They were both publishers' representatives, and in addition to that podcast, which they stopped doing in 2016, I still miss it. Anyway, they used to do these in-person events called Booktopia, and I was fortunate enough to attend one of them. In 2013, I went to Bellingham, Washington, and that was a fabulous weekend. Any of you who are familiar with Books on the Nightstand, let me know in the comments below. And if you've been to Booktopia, I'd love to hear from you. It was just such a great event. The authors that they had there had the experience of, when they were doing their author readings and answering questions, almost everybody in the audience had read the books, and so it was more like book discussion than authors trying to convince listeners to actually pick up and read the books. Though it was being surrounded by fellow book nerds, which I am finding now on BookTube, so this is good. This is good. I've gone way off on a tangent. So, okay, on we go to what else that I finished recently. I listened to the audiobook memoir Stay True by Hua Hsu, who is a Taiwanese American, and in this he really evokes a particular era and place, 1990s California. He was going to college in Berkeley and hanging around with other Asian Americans, and one of his close friends died a violent death, and Hsu writes very movingly about his grief and about how he was really searching for a way to belong, and he kind of leaned on his eccentricities. He was passionate about certain kinds of music and about creating zines and wearing thrift store clothing that wasn't like everybody else. And so I think his outsider status as being non-white, all of that was tangled up in figuring out who he was, and even into current times, which is, he's been writing this book for a long time, kind of addressing it to his dead friend. What does it mean to be here now? Who am I? those kind of existentialist questions. And he reads the audiobook himself, which is a really nice addition to the experience of listening. And another audiobook that I just finished is Claire Keegan's Foster. Oh, so good. It's practically a short story. I think technically a novella. It's, I don't know, like 80 or 90 pages. The audiobook is only an hour and a half long. It is read by Aoife McMahon. It's the story of a little girl who spends a summer with relatives in rural Ireland. It's absolutely stunning. It's haunting, perfectly contained. I've read a collection of her short stories, Antarctica, and I've read the novella Small Things Like These. I didn't think that this one would top Small Things Like These, but it does. It's now my favorite Claire Keegan. Oh, superb. 5 stars, 5 shining stars. This one is also a book about a girl, slightly older, and it is a chapter book by a Canadian author, Allison Mills, who is Ililiw Cree and settler. She's mixed heritage. And Shelley, the girl in the story, can see ghosts. So can her mom, and so can her grandmother. So in The Ghost Collector, this is the job that her grandmother does. She collects ghosts. People contact her when their place is haunted, and she goes to take care of things and help the ghosts on their way. And Shelley has apprenticed, and she's learning how to do this too. Often the ghosts are of animals, cats, mice, raccoons. Sometimes they're of people. In the second half of the book, there's been a tragedy, and Shelley has to deal with grief. This is a very gentle ghost story. It's for children about 9 to 12 years old. It's quite a lovely, tender depiction of what it's like to deal with grief. Yeah, I'm glad I picked this up. Can't remember where I heard about it, but I do know where I heard about this next book, Monkey Beach by Eden Robinson. This was a finalist for the Giller Prize in the year 2000. The winner that year was Anil's Ghost by Michael Ondaatje. And I read this then. I will often look at a long list for book prizes, and then I'll just pick up the books that interest me, which is why I still have quite a few Giller Prize winners that I haven't read. But anyway, I really enjoyed this, and I read it a second time in 2010 because Eden Robinson came to Edmonton to give a Cree lecture, the annual talk that sponsored by the Canadian Literature Centre. So I thought that was a good reason to pick it up and read it again. And then just this week, I read it a third time as a buddy read with my dear friend, Kathy Wojcicki. Now, the strange thing is, I could not remember how it ended. I suspected it probably had an ambiguous type ending because of that. And sure enough, but that's all I'm going to say about the ending. This is set in the 1980s in a very small town, a Haisla community on the west coast of British Columbia. Lisa is about 20 years old, and her younger brother has been out on a fishing trip, and he and the boat have gone missing. So through the story, we get lots and lots of flashbacks, and we also discover right from the beginning that Lisa sees ghosts, and she also gets visits from supernatural beings who seem to tell her stuff about what's going to happen, except it's hard for her to make sense of it. She is also dealing with grief. 2 people who are very close to her have died, and she struggles with that. There's a whole lot of teenage angst. There's family dysfunction, substance abuse, intergenerational trauma from residential school, so many contemporary Indigenous issues in here, environmental degradation, but it's also a page turner, a mystery with these spooky supernatural aspects to it. And I absolutely adore Monkey Beach. I have read every book Eden Robinson has written, and I will be so excited when she's got something new out. Yeah. Next up, I am going to be reading Murder for the Modern Girl. This is for my YA book club. It's by Kendall Culper, and Elaine, the book club member who recommended it, she and I have a really close overlap in the kind of books that we like. So I'm pretty excited about this. It's a murder mystery set in 1920s Chicago. So we shall see. We shall see. So that is it for my Friday reads. Thank you as always, you beautiful book nerds. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to your comments, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye for now.